And now we turn our attention to Iran, where cheaper oil is having both economic and political repercussions. Joining us for more on what the price drop might bring internally and externally for the country are Shahram Kholdi, assistant professor in the Department of History at Western University in London, Ontario, and Ramin Jahanbegloo, the York Noor visiting chair in Islamic Studies at York University. He's also the author of Time Will Say Nothing, A Philosopher Survives in Iranian Prison. Welcome to you both. Welcome back to the program. Ramin, I want to begin just by putting up a map of Iran. Can we bring that up there? All right. There's Iran sandwiched between the, some volatile countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and South Asia to the east, and the Arab Middle East to the west. Lots of difficulties in the region. We're going to talk about how oil plays into this. So let me begin with you, Shahram. How reliant is Iran on oil reserves?
Well, pretty much. I mean, the government doesn't want to admit it, but between crude oil and petrochemical exports, pretty much we can say that Iran relies up to 60% for its revenue on oil. And this was especially true in the previous years, that up to about 3 years ago, the revenue for oil came up pretty much to $120 billion for a budget that was roughly about between, however we consider it, $300 to $400 billion, varying between the previous 5-year cycle up to now. Now they have had to change their view of the situation, because this was an oil price that was based on $114 a barrel, up to $110, down to $110, up to $120. Now they have to reckon with something in the vicinity of, if we are really optimistic, about $60.
Yeah, and at the start of the week we're sitting at about 49 bucks a barrel. Iran dropped from number 2 to number 4 in terms of oil-producing nations back in 2012. So it's already been facing this lower oil revenues. Shahram said that the government doesn't want to admit how much it's making from oil to some extent. I mean, how big does oil play into the economy, Ramin?
Well, it plays a very important role because actually, Iran pays its public budget through its oil revenue. It pays its foreign debts, and it has to stabilize its currency with the oil revenue. So 3 important factors which are related to oil. And also, we have to add the Iranian foreign policy to it, because Iran plays a very important role in the Middle East as a regional power, and also is engaged in Iraq, Afghanistan, and especially militarily in Syria, and it's very costly. So how should they pay for these costs? And I think it's only oil revenue can do it. And for the Iranian fiscal year, which ends in March 2015, the government actually, Mr. Rouhani's government actually, they said that they needed something like $51 billion to balance their economy. Now, this $51 billion is possible only if the barrel of oil is around $100 per barrel. But this is not the case. We know that today the Brent crude is actually 47.61
yeah,
cents.
So it's around 50 bucks, depending over the last couple of days or so. But you make an interesting point, which is oil is political. And when we look at Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, versus Rouhani, who is seen as progressive, when it comes to how oil fits into all this, how do their views of Iran's place in the world right now differ?
I think that we have to understand the fact that why Mr. Rouhani was elected, how he was elected. He was elected on 2 promises. One promise is given to the conservatives and the reformists, that he's going to fight for their interests, economic interests and political interests, and he's going to try to relieve the sanctions which are against Iran, which has not been the case up to now. Only we know that there has been only $5 billion which has been relieved. And Iran is still waiting for something like $100 billion to be relieved, and plus the other sanctions. And the second promise was to the Iranian people to fight against inflation, to fight against unemployment. Now, we know by fact that there is still something like 7 million Iranians who are unemployed. We know by fact that the government is cutting the subsidies and on fuel and on food. They are putting taxes, they're hiking taxes actually. So a lot of difficulties for Mr. Rouhani's government, and at the same time, the nuclear talks are not going very well, especially because the hawks in Washington, as we know, and very recently, actually, there was an article by Mr. Edelman, Dennis Ross, and Teki saying that Iran is in a stalemate with the U.S. in the nuclear talks, and we should not, I mean, Americans should not give more concessions, make more concessions to Iran. And so they are asking for more sanctions, which is going to be very difficult for Iran.
Shahram, I called Rouhani a progressive, given especially what Ramin said there. Maybe pragmatic is a more appropriate term for him.
I would say pragmatic, and this is mainly because the Islamic Republic effectively placed the only loyal opposition that it had during the post-presidential election protests of 2009 in jail. And those people are still in jail. So the Islamic Republic no longer has an effective loyal opposition. So what was left was that the pragmatics, and the pragmatics led by Rouhani were the ones, and this is what Rouhani said, that he would be carrying a key during his election campaign and saying that I have the key to all of our problems. And he said that, well, the centrifuges, that was the reference to Iranian nuclear program, the centrifuges are supposed to basically turn around, but we have to make sure that the economic wheel also turns as well. So, but the problem that Rouhani has, and this is the situation, that for the past 2 years we have had a swift and I would say steep decline in the price of oil, and Rouhani has tried to fight in a very different, perhaps moderate way, the radicals through public rhetoric and propaganda. For example, he said that maybe we should bring some of the issues concerning policy as we have been allowed to do so in the Constitution through referendum. Maybe you should ask people how we have to deal with the nuclear issue or with certain economic issues.
It seems to me that the low price of oil isn't good for either guy, Rouhani or Khamenei. Politically speaking, though, does one have the upper hand in this?
I think things are more complex than they appear. First of all, to have the nuclear talks, Mr. Rouhani and his cabinet, they had the accord of the Supreme Leader, Mr. Khamenei. But at the same time, Mr. Khamenei and the ultra-conservatives in Iran, they were talking about the resistance economy, and saying that we don't need the nuclear talks, we can go without having given concessions, and we have to continue the line of the revolution. So that created difficulty. Now, what has come up very recently, actually, after the death of King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia, you know, Mr. Zarif, he made a trip to Riyadh, and he met John Kerry. And now, yesterday, he was summoned by the Iranian parliament that why did you take a walk with Mr. Kerry? Now, you see the complexity. At the same time, you have a government which is supposed to be approved by the Supreme Leader and the parliament at the same time, and they have to go forward in their concessions, but at the same time in their talks, in the nuclear talks, and they need the nuclear talks to relieve the sanctions, because without the relief of the sanctions, Iran cannot continue its economy. It's going to be in a very bad shape, especially because they think that the Saudis are fomenting a conspiracy against Iran by producing a lot of oil and putting a lot of oil in the market, and so plunging the price of oil.
I am glad you brought up the Saudis, because I want to read a quote. This comes from the BBC. This is last month, prior to King Abdullah's death. But here's what was written on the BBC. From Riyadh, the world looks a grim place, and the Saudis have a host of concerns that they feel are not being addressed adequately, either by their allies in the West or by their partners in the region. Many experts talk of a Cold War between Saudi and Iran, where on every major issue of regional concern, an Iranian gain is viewed by the Saudis as a loss. And for the House of al-Saud, alarm bells are ringing. Okay, so that was written last month. We've had a seemingly somewhat smooth transition to King Salman in Saudi Arabia early this month. Are the alarm bells ringing for the House of al-Saud?
We have to put this into perspective. The Saudis have been of late so active, and this was post-American invasion, that the Saudis started to intervene in the Iraqi affairs because they felt that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, on behalf of the Islamic Republic, was involved in propping up the Iraqi militias. So the Saudis were expected to take the side of the Sunnis, while the Islamic regime was of Iran was trying to fill the vacuum of Saddam being overthrown by the Americans. When the Arab Spring happened, of course, it led to the possibility of the Assad regime being brought down by pro-Saudi militants, and there we had another proxy war emerging out of the Arab Spring. The fact is that Iran and Saudi Arabia, since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, have been competing massively for, I would say, hegemony to a certain degree in the region. But it is not that Iran, with its power, and the Saudis, I have to say that Saud al-Faisal, the Saudi foreign minister, himself, when the United States was ratcheting up rhetoric of democratization, and it seemed that after Iraq there could be a George W. Bush-initiated intervention against the Islamic Republic. I vividly recall that the Saudi foreign minister mentioned that Iran is an old civilization and we have to appreciate its potentials and expectations. So it is not that the Saudis do not appreciate Iran's regional position and claim to supremacy to a certain degree. It is just that they feel every now and again the Islamic Republic tries to encroach upon accepted order that has been developed between the Gulf nations, Arab-Persian Gulf nations, and Saudi Arabia. And we should not forget that Saudi Arabia believes that it is the patron of all Sunni groups, all Sunni people in the region as well. And the Islamic Republic believes that it is the patron of all the Shia groups. I mean, before you wouldn't hear Yemen would have a Shia, for example, sect. Before, these people used to be called the Zaydis. But thanks to the Islamic Republic's propaganda, now the Zaydis, who would not necessarily be traditionally referred to as the Shia, are now being referred to as the Shia.
Okay, so thank you for all of that. And it speaks to Ramin's point earlier. This issue, we can talk about oil, but not in a silo, so to speak, that it is very complex geopolitically and also religiously and regionally. I want to read another quote, because this will help us move our conversation forward into the next part. And let me bring this up. This is from the Financial Post. This was written at the end of last year. Here's what it says. It's a bit long. The price drop is simply economic war waged by the Arabs against Iran and a shot across the bow in the Shia versus Sunni religious war underway in the Middle East. Iran is Shia oil and Gulf or Saudi oil is Sunni oil. Iran has exported revolution for decades throughout the region and has spent years developing nuclear powers that may or may not become nuclear weapons. Indications are that Iran has even been financing ISIS, even though it is Sunni-based, just to create chaos among Sunnis. Goes on to say, the timing of this price drop is designed to keep Iran at the nuclear negotiating table by crippling its economy and that of its nuclear supplier, Russia. These talks continue with faintly positive signs of resolution, and the oil cloud will help. It may even be a bargaining chip, and that is why it would be a good bet if Iran signs on to the non-proliferation treaty and meaningful audits and inspections, prices will increase. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, Ramin, but I mean, is that true? Is the price of oil so built into what's going on and has everything to do with, talks and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. It has always been like that. I think that we have to mention the fact that this is not the first time that the Saudis are having this action in the OPEC actually, right, to plunging the oil price. They did it against Saddam Hussein in the mid-80s. Just because.
So this isn't about, I mean, as Diane Francis argues in this article, it's an attack on one nation, that Saudis are deliberately doing this for against Iran. You're saying they've done this before.
They're doing it against Iran, but at the same time, America is asking them to do it against Putin and Moscow in what's happening in Ukraine, because the Russians they're going to have many problems also, as you know, as exporters of gas and oil. But I think that there are several points here. First of all, the Saudis, as Professor Khaldi was saying very correctly, the Saudis don't want a Shiite crescent in the Middle East going from Lebanon to Bahrain, okay? So they're going to stop it everywhere. Secondly, despite what is said in this article, Iran has never helped IS or ISIS. Actually, Iran has promised the Europeans and the Americans to fight against IS, and they went and they bombed actually the IS bases in Iraq, and they're fighting against IS also in Syria. But Iranians, they're telling the Obama administration that we're going to help you against IS or ISIS, but in the same time, you have to relieve the sanctions if you want us to do that. And the thing is that many, I would say, Republicans and hawks in Washington, they're afraid of the fact that if Iran gets engaged too much in Syria, as they are right now, and they get too much engaged again in Iraq against IS, they're going to go and stay there, and it's going to be difficult to take them out, as they were very close to al-Maliki already and his government. So they don't want, and the Saudis, the Qataris, the Kuwait, they don't want a Shiite government again in Iraq, and they don't want Iran to have too much presence in these, countries of the Persian Gulf. We have to understand that.
If you don't mind, I just wanted to thank Professor John Biggs.
You guys are thanking each other because he was your former professor, or your teacher, but when you both lived in Iran. Okay, this is nice.
Well, for mentioning Russia, I mean, a few days ago, the chief of staff of the Russian Armed Forces was in Tehran, and Russia and Iran are becoming closer, I believe, partly because of the pressure, simultaneous pressure of sanctions on both nations. Before this, Russia was very hesitant to give Iran very sophisticated anti-aircraft missile system, but according to a new defense agreement that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and the Russian armed forces have signed, Russians are going to give Iran the sophisticated S-300 radar anti-aircraft system. So the West has to look at its priorities. It is true that the enemy of your enemy is not necessarily your friend, and currently there is this problem of ISIS and the problem of terrorism at the domestic level in Western Europe that they have to deal with. But the question is that what other alternative they have, considering the circumstances. Are they going to send Western boots on the ground to fight ISIS, or are they going to arrive at some sort of a functional, at least, cooperation with the Islamic Republic of Iran?
I think the next round of negotiations is set for March about Iran's nuclear program. And I don't want to say in the meantime, but in the coming months, Ramin, I mean, if you look at Iran, in the 80s it had an economic crisis, not exactly the same, but similar to the one that it's facing today. And so I guess the big question is, how much more can Iran take in terms of sanctions and in terms of oil prices dropping? How much more can it handle?
Well, I mean, that's what the conservatives in Iran, they say we've been through that in 1980, so it's not going to be too difficult for us. But this time it's very difficult, actually. And I think practically everyone wants to get to a nuclear deal at some point, as some kind of a nuclear deal, with the exception of, I would say, those who are completely unrealistic in Iranian policy and Iranian politics. But those who are looking very pragmatically and realistically, like Mr. Rouhani and Zarif and others, they really want to have a nuclear deal. But the difficulty is that at the same time, you know, the Iranian foreign policy has a lot of impact on its domestic policy, and vice versa. Its domestic policy a lot on the Iranian foreign policy. So we have to understand that the Middle East in the whole is going through a huge chaos, not only in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, but the whole Middle East. And Iran wants to be a player, an actor, an important actor, and also a hegemonic actor in the future of the Middle East. And of course, Obama administration is trying its best, I think, is trying its best to get the positive, I mean, on the side of the Americans, to get the positive results from the talks with Iran. But at the same time, there is a lot of negative, I would say, forces coming and trying to stop it. But each country, like Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Iran, they're thinking about their own interests. And in the middle of all those, you have the non-state actors, as Professor Holdy said, that which is 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 making a huge problem. So Iranians certainly are promising to help the allies and to help especially United States of America in the fight against IS. And we should not forget the Europeans. Europeans have lost their markets in Iran. Iran is a huge young market for European economy, and they want to regain that. Today, the Iranian market is in the hands of the Chinese, and partly in the hand of the Russians, but mainly the Chinese. So the Europeans, they want to get to a nuclear talk to Iran so they can get back to the Iranian markets, and they have already started sending their investors, you know, because they think that the Iranian market is a very important market. At the same time, they're hoping, of course, Israel doesn't like this policy very much. They're hoping that Iran will get more and more pragmatic and somehow gets into the Council of Nations, and they can sit down with the Iranians and fight against IS and others.
I got only a couple of minutes left, but I want you to weigh in here. I mean, as we move ahead in the months ahead, what are the things to keep our eyes on in terms of where Iran's headed?
Well, I think the radicals under Khamenei's leadership will not concede any ground anytime soon. They have turned this enrichment issue into some sort of a red line that is very difficult for them to cross. And unlike Ayatollah Khamenei, Khamenei does not command the kind of consensual, I would say, respect that that Khamenei enjoyed. And it would be very difficult for him to compromise.
Lots of things to keep our eyes on. Thank you both. You taught him well, Professor.
Thank
you did well, right?
I'm happy, yes.
Shamar Khuldi from Western University and Ramin Jahanbegloo from York University is also the author of Time Will Say Nothing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.